There is a kind of stillness that appears in the hands of someone mending cloth. The needle enters, the thread follows, one stitch, then the next. The mind does not leap ahead to the finished seam. It does not replay the tear that came before. It rests for that moment in the small motion of closing a gap. This is not efficiency. This is not even patience, exactly. It is something quieter, a kind of meeting between attention and action. The hand knows what it is doing because the mind has agreed to be there with it. We have mostly lost this, not because we are careless, but because we have been taught that presence is a luxury, that the mind should always be preparing, scanning, managing what comes next. We answer an email while water boils. We plan tomorrow while walking today. We listen to a voice while reading text on a screen. And we call this normal. We call it productivity. But the mind does not actually split. It flickers. It toggles. It gives a fraction of itself to each thing, and the remainder to the anxiety of holding it all together. What we experience is not simultaneity. It is fragmentation. And fragmentation has a texture. You can feel it in the body. A tightness across the shoulders, a shallowness in the breath. The eyes darting, the jaw set, the thoughts arriving faster than they can be completed. There is a hum beneath it all, a low-grade static that we have learned to call concentration. But it is not concentration. It is division. The Buddha spoke often of the gathered mind, not the controlled mind, not the perfected mind, the gathered mind, like water that has stopped scattering across stones and collects, instead, in one place. Clear, still enough to reflect. This gathering does not happen through force. It happens through release, by letting the 10 things become one thing, by allowing the attention to come home. When you wash a dish, wash the dish, not as a rule, not as a discipline you perform to prove something, but as a choice to stop scattering. The water is warm, the plate is smooth or textured. The soap makes a particular sound against ceramic. These are not distractions from the task. They are the task. The mind does not need to be elsewhere. It can rest in the simple fact of what the hands are doing. This is where the practice begins. Not in meditation posture, not on a cushion, though the cushion helps. It begins in the gesture of return. Again and again, the choice to bring the attention back to the single thread you are pulling. And it is a choice you will make 1,000 times. Because the mind has momentum. It has been trained to divide, to anticipate, to protect you by never fully landing. It believes that presence is dangerous, that if you stop watching all the horizons at once, something will be missed. Something will go wrong. So the mind will pull. It will say there is something more important, something you should be doing instead. And this is not failure. This is just the habit revealing itself. The work is not to eliminate the pull. The work is to notice it and to return anyway. The needle enters. The thread follows. You do not need to be good at this. You do not need to sustain it for long. Even 5 seconds of full presence is enough to interrupt the pattern, to remind the nervous system that it is safe to land, that the moment you are in is wide enough to hold you. There is a teaching in early Buddhism about the development of calm. It does not begin with transcendence. It begins with simplicity, with reducing the variables. The monastics were encouraged to eat one meal, in one place at one time, to sit in one posture, to watch one object, not as deprivation, but as relief, as a way of letting the mind stop managing and start noticing. You are not a monastic. You do not need to be. But you can borrow the principle. You can ask in any moment, what would it mean to do only this? Not forever, just now, just for the length of this breath, this step, this sentence. The thread does not move faster when you worry about the seam. The dish does not become cleaner when you think about the next one. The mind does not become sharper by splitting, it becomes sharper by arriving. And so the invitation is small, not to transform your life, not to overhaul your schedule, but to choose one thing, to let it be enough, to feel what happens when the attention stops dividing and starts dwelling. There is a particular quality to the way the mind moves when it is not yet finished with what it is doing. You can feel it in the body, a kind of incompleteness, a reaching forward even while the hands are still occupied. It is as though you are trying to hold water in your palm while already grasping for the next handful. The water spills. You never quite have either one. This is not laziness or distraction in the way we usually think of it. It is something more subtle. It is the habit of anticipation becoming so strong that it interrupts the present action before that action is complete. You sit down to eat, and before the first bite has been tasted, your mind is already moving toward the next task. You are speaking with someone, and while they are still speaking, you are composing your reply. You are walking, and your attention is already at your destination. The Buddha taught something very simple about this. When walking, just walk. When eating, just eat. There is no philosophy here, no moral lesson about being a better person. It is an observation about what actually happens when attention is whole. When you are fully walking, the walking is complete in itself. There is no sense of incompleteness that sends you reaching ahead. The feet meet the ground. The body moves. The breath flows. That is enough. But we have learned to live in a different way. We have learned to live as though the present moment is always a means to the next one. As though what is happening now is only valuable insofar as it gets us somewhere else. So we move through our days in a state of perpetual reaching. Hands full of water, fingers already opening to let it go so we can reach for more. What happens in the body when you try to hold water while reaching? There is a tension, a kind of strain. The hand that is holding wants to relax and open. The hand that is reaching wants to close and grasp. You cannot do both at once without something breaking or spilling. And yet this is the posture we maintain for hours at a time. We do not notice it because we have grown so accustomed to it that it feels like normal. The water metaphor is not just about the physical sensation, though that matters. It is also about what we actually retain when we live this way. When attention is split between what is and what is next, neither receives the full presence it needs. The water spills not because you are careless, but because you cannot hold it while reaching. The present task loses its coherence. The next task remains a phantom, not yet real, only imagined. Consider what happens when you eat a meal while thinking about work. The food is there, your mouth is working, but the tasting does not happen. The flavors do not register. You swallow and realize you have no memory of what you just ate. The eating was not complete, and the work you were thinking about, it is still waiting for you. Your thinking about it did not bring you closer to doing it. You are caught between two places and fully present in neither. This is where the teaching lands differently. When walking, just walk. This is not an instruction to be more disciplined. It is not a command to focus harder. It is a description of what is possible. It is pointing to the fact that when you are only walking, when nothing else is competing for your attention, the walking is whole. There is a completeness to it, a satisfaction, even if the walk is ordinary. Even if you are walking to do something you do not particularly want to do. The same is true of eating. When you are only eating, when the next thing has not yet begun to pull at you, the eating is complete in itself. The flavors arrive. The body receives nourishment. There is a natural rhythm to it. You eat until you are satisfied, and then you stop. You do not need to keep eating, because you were never fully there to begin with. The reaching ahead is so habitual that most people do not notice when it is happening. It lives in the background of awareness. It is the constant low hum beneath everything else. So the practice is not to force yourself to be present. The practice is simply to notice. To notice the exact moment when your attention begins to split. When the thing in front of you is still unfinished, and yet your mind is already moving toward the next thing. You might notice it when you are reading and realize you have read 3 paragraphs without understanding any of them. Your eyes moved across the words, but your attention was somewhere else. You might notice it when you are in conversation and realize you have stopped listening, because you are thinking about what you want to say next. You might notice it in your body, in a kind of restlessness or impatience, even though there is nothing actually demanding your attention right now. This noticing is the beginning, not because noticing will instantly fix the problem, but because you cannot change something you do not see. And the moment you see it, something shifts. The tension becomes visible. The reaching becomes audible. You can feel in your hands what it is like to try to hold water while grasping for more. The next time you eat, you might pause and simply feel what is present. Not trying to be perfect at it. Not trying to prove anything. Just noticing whether your attention is whole or divided. Whether you are only eating, or whether you are eating and reaching. And if you are reaching, what does that feel like in your body? Where do you feel the strain? There is a particular kind of fatigue that does not come from doing too much. It comes from holding too much at once. The mind that clings to many things finds no rest. This is not a judgment. It is simply what happens when we try to carry more than our hands can hold. Imagine standing before a door you need to open. Your hands are full. One hand holds a stone. The other holds another stone. You cannot turn the handle. You cannot push. You stand there, aware of the door, aware of the stones, aware that nothing moves. The stones are not heavy in the way weight is heavy. They are heavy in the way unfinished things are heavy. Each one is a task not yet complete. Each one is a thought you came back to. Each one is a promise you made to yourself that you have not kept. Most of us do not notice we are carrying these stones. We move through the day with them in our hands, and we call it normal. We call it busy. We call it life. But there is a quiet tension underneath. The body knows. The breath knows. There is a held quality to it, a kind of bracing. We do not feel the weight until we set the stones down. This is what craving does. Not craving in the sense of wanting something you do not have. Craving here means the impulse to hold on, to keep something in your grip, to not let it be finished. We start a task. Before it is complete, we turn to another. We open 5 browser tabs. We begin 3 conversations. We think about what we need to do tomorrow while we are doing something today. The mind reaches forward and backward at the same time, and the body stays here, caught in the middle. The teaching says the mind that clings to many things finds no rest. This is not because we are doing too much. It is because we are not finishing anything. There is a difference. You can do many things and feel clear. You can do one thing and feel scattered. It depends on whether you are holding the task or whether the task is holding you. When we cling to a task, when we keep it in our mind even after we have set it aside, we are not really setting it aside. We are carrying it. It sits in the background of our attention like a stone in a closed fist. The hand cannot open. The hand cannot receive. The hand cannot rest. Notice how this works in a simple moment. You decide to make tea. You stand and walk to the kitchen. But part of your mind is still in the room you left. You are thinking about the email you did not send. You are thinking about the conversation that did not go well. You are thinking about what you will do next. The water boils. You pour it, but you are not really pouring it. You are pouring while holding something else. The tea tastes like distraction. Now imagine a different moment. You decide to make tea, you stand. You walk to the kitchen. You notice the light coming through the window. You hear the sound of the kettle. You feel the warmth of the cup in your hand. You are here. This is not because you are special or disciplined. It is because you have set down the other stones. You have let the other tasks wait. They will still be there. But for now, your hands are free. This is what the practice offers. Not the idea that you should do one thing at a time. That is just a rule, and rules create resistance. The practice is to complete one small task fully before starting another, and to notice what shifts when you do. Not to notice it as an achievement, just to notice it. Pick something small. Something that takes 5 minutes or 10. Wash the dishes. Write one email. Read one page. Make a phone call. The size does not matter. What matters is that you finish it. Not finish it in the sense of checking it off. Finish it in the sense of giving it your whole attention until it is truly complete. Then stop. Set it down. Let your hands be empty for a moment. What happens in that space? There is often a small silence, a small settling. The body relaxes a little. The breath becomes less held. You did not do anything special. You simply stopped carrying stones you did not need to carry. When you do the next task, the same thing happens. You complete it. You set it down. You notice the relief, not the relief of accomplishment. The relief of setting something down completely, of letting go, of having your hands empty, even if only for a breath or two. This is not about productivity. This is about freedom. The freedom that comes when the mind is not split between what you are doing and what you are not doing. The freedom of a hand that can open. The freedom of attention that can rest on one thing and feel the aliveness of it. You do not need to change your whole life. You do not need to do everything this way. Begin with one small task. Notice what it feels like to finish it. Notice what it feels like to set it down. That noticing is the whole practice. That noticing is where the rest begins. There is a quality to modern life that feels like running between rooms. You finish one thing, a message, a task, a thought, and before the air has settled, you are already reaching for the next. The mind moves so quickly from one object to another that there is almost no gap between them. It is as if you are afraid that if you pause, something will be lost, or perhaps that you yourself will disappear into that small silence. This rushing is not laziness. It is often the opposite. It comes from a kind of urgency, a sense that there is always something waiting. And so the day becomes a series of transitions without transitions. One moment bleeding directly into the next, with no space to breathe between them. The silence between two notes in a song is not empty. It is where the music lives. Without it, there would be only noise. The notes would collapse into each other, and nothing would be heard clearly. But in that small gap, that held breath, each note becomes distinct. The silence gives shape to the sound. It allows the ear to rest and to prepare for what comes next. Your life has a similar structure, though you may not have noticed it. Between one thought and the next, There is a gap. Between finishing one action and beginning another, there is a space. This gap is not wasted time. It is not dead air. It is where you actually live. And yet most of us hurry past it so quickly that we never feel it. We treat it as something to eliminate rather than something to inhabit. There is an old teaching from the Zen tradition that points to this directly. Between two thoughts, there is a gap. That gap is your life, not the thinking, not the doing. The gap itself, the space where nothing is being grasped, nothing is being resisted. Just this, just what is here. When you move from task to task without pause, you are never actually present for any of it. You are already leaving before you have arrived. The mind is forward-reaching, always anticipating the next thing. And in that forward-reaching, the current moment is lost. You do the work, but you do not inhabit the work. You speak to someone, but you are already thinking about what you need to do next. The body is here, but the attention is elsewhere. This is not a moral failure. It is simply what happens when there is no pause. The mind has a momentum. Once it is in motion, it keeps moving. And we have become very skilled at keeping it in motion. We have built entire systems around this. Notifications, schedules, the constant availability of something to do. The gap has become frightening because we have forgotten what it feels like. But the gap is where rest lives. Not the kind of rest that comes from collapsing at the end of the day, exhausted. The kind of rest that comes from stopping in the middle of living. From allowing one thing to be complete before the next begins. From letting the silence do its work. When you listen to a piece of music that moves you, you are not moved by the notes alone. You are moved by the relationship between the notes. The space that gives them meaning. A musician understands this. They do not rush from one note to the next. They allow each note to sound fully. They let the silence between notes be as important as the notes themselves. This is what creates music instead of mere sound. You can practice this. It is simple, and it is available to you right now, in this very moment. The practice is to take 3 breaths between finishing one thing and beginning the next. That is all. 3 breaths. Not as a discipline, not as something you must do perfectly. Simply as an invitation to feel the gap. When you finish a task, closing a document, ending a conversation, putting down your phone, pause. Before you reach for the next thing, before the mind moves to the next object, take 3 breaths. Full breaths, not rushed, not performed, just breathing with your attention on the breath itself. The first breath may feel strange. The mind may already be pulling toward what comes next. There may be a subtle anxiety, as if something is being lost in this small pause. This is natural. The mind has momentum. The second breath often brings a slight settling. The urgency begins to quiet. You may notice the body, the sensation of sitting or standing, the quality of the air around you. By the third breath, something shifts, not dramatically, but there is a texture to it, a quality of aliveness that was not present in the rushing. The gap becomes perceptible, and in that perception, you are no longer afraid of it. This is not meditation in the formal sense. It is a small gesture toward presence, a way of punctuating your day with silence instead of allowing it to be one continuous rush. And each time you do this, the gap becomes less foreign. It becomes a place you can return to, a place where you are actually alive. The teaching points to something you already know, but have forgotten that the space between things is not wasted. It is essential. It is where you rest. It is where clarity can arise. It is where one moment ends and another can truly begin. You can begin this practice now. The next time you finish something, even something small, Notice the impulse to move immediately to the next thing. And instead, pause, breathe, feel the silence. Let it be there 3 times. That is enough. There is a quiet assumption we live by, so ordinary we rarely notice it. We believe that doing many things at once saves time. We believe that splitting our attention across several tasks, several screens, several conversations makes us more efficient, more productive, more alive even. And yet, if you pause and notice what actually happens when you try to hold 3 things at once, something becomes visible. Imagine you are in a room with 3 people speaking to you simultaneously. One tells you about their day, another asks for your advice, a third shares something they find beautiful. You turn your head from person to person. You catch fragments. You nod. You say things that are almost relevant, but you are not truly hearing any of them. No one feels truly heard. And you, in the middle, feel a kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with the length of time. It is the exhaustion of presence fractured, of attention scattered like light through a prism, never settling, never gathering. This is not a flaw in your character. This is simply how attention works. Attention is not infinitely divisible. It cannot be stretched thin across many things and remain attention. What remains is a kind of half-presence, a skimming, a performance of engagement that satisfies no one, least of all yourself. We do this with our days. We do it with our work. We open an email while eating breakfast, while listening to someone speak. We believe we are accomplishing more. What we are actually doing is removing ourselves from each moment before we have truly entered it. We are present nowhere. There is a teaching from the Mahayana tradition that points to something deeper here. To do one thing with full attention is to honor all beings. This is not a moral command. It is not asking you to be better or more disciplined. It is pointing to something that happens naturally when attention is whole. When you truly listen to someone, you are not performing kindness. You are not checking a box. Something in them relaxes because they feel seen. When you truly do one task with your full mind, the quality of what you create changes. Not because you are trying harder, but because you are actually present. The opposite is also true. When we scatter our attention, we scatter something in the world. We create a kind of fragmentation. The person speaking to us feels it. The work we do carries the mark of our divided mind, and we ourselves live in a state of constant low-level anxiety because we are never quite finishing anything. We are always leaving something undone, always moving to the next thing, always aware of what we are not doing. This is the hidden cost of multitasking. Not that it is inefficient, though it is, but that it removes us from our own lives. We rush through our days, believing we are saving time, when what we are actually doing is losing it. Losing the only thing we actually have, which is this moment. And then the next one. And then the next. There is a particular quality to attention when it is whole. It is not strained. It is not forced. It is almost restful, in a way. When you give your full mind to something, even something ordinary, even washing dishes or writing an email, something shifts. The activity becomes complete in itself. There is no part of you elsewhere, checking the time, thinking about what comes next. There is just the warmth of the water, or the forming of words, or the sound of someone's voice. This is not about perfection. You will not maintain perfect attention. Your mind will wander. You will think of something else, and then you will notice and gently return. That noticing and returning is the practice itself. It is not a failure. It is the actual work of training your mind to be where you are. What happens if you choose one task? something you would normally rush through or do alongside other things, and give it your full attention for 10 minutes. Not as a test, not as a way to prove something, but as an experiment in what presence feels like. Choose something simple. Drink tea, read a page, write something, have a conversation. Set aside everything else. No phone nearby, no browser open. Just this one thing. Notice what arises. Notice the impulse to check something to move to the next thing. Don't judge it. Just see it. See how the mind pulls away from the present moment, and see what happens when you gently bring it back. Again and again. After 10 minutes, pause. What was different? Not in terms of productivity, though you might notice something there, but in terms of how it felt to be fully present. How the activity felt when your whole mind was in it. Whether you felt more alive in those 10 minutes than you usually do. This is not a promise that you will transform your life, but it is an invitation to notice something that is already true. That presence has a quality. That attention, when it is whole, changes everything it touches, including you. There is something we all know but rarely notice. Our hands are washing a bowl right now, but our mind is already at the next task, or caught in something that happened an hour ago. The body is here. The attention is somewhere else. This split is so ordinary that we stop seeing it as a problem at all. We think it is just how the mind works. But there is another way, and it is simpler than you might expect. In the Zen tradition, there is a teaching that says, wash the bowl you are washing, not the one you washed yesterday or will wash tomorrow. It sounds almost too simple. Of course you are washing the bowl in front of you. What else would you be doing? And yet, if you pay attention to your own experience, you will find that this simple instruction is pointing at something most of us have never actually done. Think of a bird landing on a branch. There is no hesitation in that landing. The bird does not arrive while thinking about the branch it left or the one it will visit next. It lands, and in that landing, it is completely there. The whole of its attention, its body, its purpose, all of it converges on that single moment. That is what unified attention looks like. Not forced, not strained, just arrived. When we wash a bowl, we are rarely that arrived. Our hands move through the motions while our mind is composing an email, rehearsing a conversation, or planning dinner. The bowl gets clean. Technically, we accomplish the task, but we miss the actual experience of washing. We miss the warmth of the water, the texture of the sponge, the way the light catches the wet ceramic. We miss being alive in that moment. This is not a moral failing. It is not laziness or carelessness. It is simply what happens when attention and action are not together. The mind has learned to operate this way. It has learned to do one thing while thinking about another, and we have become so skilled at this split that we do not even register it anymore. But notice what happens when the split closes. When your hands are washing a bowl and your attention is also washing that same bowl, something shifts. There is no effort required to keep yourself focused, because there is nothing pulling you away. The task and the awareness of the task are the same thing. This is not concentration in the sense of forcing your mind to stay put. It is the opposite. It is what happens when the mind has nowhere else it needs to be. The Zen teaching is not asking you to be present in some spiritual or transcendent way. It is asking something much more practical. It is asking you to actually be where you are, to let your attention rest on what your hands are actually touching right now. Not yesterday's bowl, not tomorrow's, this one. You can begin to notice this split anywhere. When you are eating, your hands bring food to your mouth, while your eyes are on a screen or a thought. When you are walking, your feet are moving along the path while your mind is somewhere else entirely. When you are listening to someone speak, your ears are receiving words while your attention is already formulating your response. The pattern is everywhere once you start to see it. And here is what becomes clear. When you look closely, the split creates a kind of exhaustion. Not because presence is difficult, but because the mind is working against itself. It is trying to do two things at once. It is trying to be here and there simultaneously, which is impossible. So it oscillates. It flickers between the task and the thought, never fully settling anywhere. That flickering is tiring. When you bring your eyes to what your hands are touching, something settles. Let your gaze rest on the actual surface, beneath your fingers. Feel the temperature. Notice the texture. If you are washing a bowl, watch the water run over it. Watch the soap dissolve. Watch your own hands moving, not in a self-conscious way. Not performing presence for yourself, just looking at what is actually there. This simple act of letting your eyes rest on what your hands are doing creates a kind of gravity. The attention naturally follows the gaze. The mind stops wandering because it has something real to be with. Not an idea about washing, not a memory of washing. The actual sensation of this bowl, this water, these hands, right now. The bird on the branch does not think about being present. It simply lands. And in that landing, presence is complete. Your hands know how to wash a bowl. They have done it many times. What they need is for your attention to join them. Not to supervise them or judge them, but simply to be there, seeing what they are seeing, feeling what they are feeling. When you try this, you may notice that the mind will still wander. It will pull away toward planning or memory or fantasy. That is not failure. That is just what minds do. The practice is simply to notice when that has happened and to gently bring your eyes back to what your hands are touching. Again and again, not with frustration, but with the same quiet intention that a bird has when it lands on a branch. It is not about getting somewhere. It is about being fully where you already are. There is a particular kind of restlessness that arrives the moment you finish something. Not during the doing, not before it begins, but in that exact moment when the last word is written, the last dish is dried, the last email is sent. You may notice it as a small impulse, a reaching forward, a glance toward what comes next. Sometimes it is so quick you do not even see it. The mind has already moved on before you have truly arrived at the completion of what you were doing. This restlessness has a quality of incompleteness, even though the task itself is complete. The body may still be sitting in the chair. Your hands may still be resting on the desk, but something in you is already elsewhere, already preparing, already orienting toward the next thing. And this is the particular exhaustion that modern life creates. Not the exhaustion of doing many things, but the exhaustion of never actually finishing anything, of never allowing yourself to land in the space that comes after. The wise, in the old teachings, are said to rest in the space between doing and not doing. This is not a poetic phrase meant to sound beautiful. It is an observation about what actually happens when the mind is at ease, when you are not grasping for the next task and not clinging to the last one. There is a kind of stillness available, a kind of ground. But we have become so unaccustomed to this ground that when we encounter it, we mistake it for emptiness, for wasted time, for a gap that needs to be filled. Consider water after a stone has sunk into it. The stone falls. There is disturbance. Ripples spread outward. The water is agitated in motion. But then, Gradually the ripples settle. The surface grows still. The water does not rush to become still. It does not strain or effort its way back to clarity. It simply ceases the motion that was caused by the falling, and what remains is its natural state. Stillness, transparency, rest. When you finish a task, something similar is available. The doing has caused a kind of motion in your attention, in your energy. Your mind was focused, directed, purposeful. And then the task ends. What happens next is not the beginning of something new. What happens next, if you allow it, is a settling, a return to a simpler state. Not emptiness, not boredom, but an absence of the particular tension that doing requires. We do not know how to be with this space. We have not been taught to value it. We have been taught that the moment a task ends is the moment to begin the next one. That rest is something you earn only after you have finished everything. That the space between tasks is a failure of productivity, not a natural and necessary part of how a human being actually functions. So when the space arrives, we feel it as a kind of anxiety. We fill it quickly. We move to the phone. We think ahead to the next meeting. We make a list of what comes after. Anything to avoid simply being in the completion. But this avoidance has a cost. It means you never actually complete anything. Not in the way that allows the nervous system to register that something is finished. Not in the way that allows you to gather yourself before moving to what comes next. You are always in motion, always in the middle of something, always reaching forward. And from this place, exhaustion is inevitable. Equanimity, in the Buddhist understanding, is not indifference. It is not a kind of blank acceptance of everything. It is, rather, a steadiness in the face of change. A capacity to be present with what is actually happening without needing to push it away or pull it closer. And equanimity is exactly what becomes available in the space after completion, if you allow yourself to rest there. What would it be like to sit with the completion itself? Not to do anything with it, not to move toward the next task, not to evaluate whether you did well enough. Simply to be present with the fact that something has ended, to let your attention rest there the way water settles after the stone has sunk, to notice what arises when you stop doing, what sensations are present in your body, what the quality of your breath is, what the simple fact of being alive right now, without task or purpose, actually feels like. This is not a difficult practice. It does not require special knowledge or years of training. It requires only a willingness to pause, to sit, perhaps, for 1 minute after you have finished something. 1 minute without reaching for the next thing, without checking what comes next, without preparing or planning, just sitting, just breathing, just allowing the water to settle. You might begin this evening after a small task, after washing your hands, after finishing a meal, after sending a message. Notice the moment when the action is complete. And then, instead of moving immediately to what comes next, pause. Sit for a breath or two. For longer if it feels natural. Notice what happens when you do not fill the space. Notice what becomes available when you allow yourself to rest in the stillness that is always there, waiting, beneath all the doing. The practice returns us to simplicity, not the simplicity of having less to do, but the simplicity of meeting what is here with full presence, 1 breath, 1 step, 1 task held in awareness without the weight of everything else pressing in from the edges. This is not a skill you master once and carry forward like a certificate. It is a returning. Again and again the mind scatters. Again and again you notice. And in that noticing, without harshness, you come back. The coming back is the practice, not the staying. The coming back. There will be days when the pull toward distraction feels stronger than your capacity to resist it. Days when the mind moves so quickly that even the intention to slow down seems to slip away before you can hold it. This is not failure. This is the condition of having a mind. The practice does not ask you to be other than you are. It asks only that you see clearly what is happening and choose when you can to return. And in that return, something shifts. Not always dramatically. Often it is quiet. A softening in the chest, a steadiness in the breath. The sense that you are here fully, even if only for a moment. These moments accumulate, not as achievements, but as a kind of trust. Trust that presence is possible. Trust that you do not need to be anywhere other than where you are. The world will continue to move quickly. Demands will not disappear. The noise will not suddenly quiet itself out of respect for your practice. But you begin to notice that you can move through it differently. Not untouched, but not swept away. Not immune, but not drowning. There is a difference between being in the current and being the current. You learn to feel that difference. And perhaps, in time, you begin to see that this practice is not only for you. When you are present with one thing, you are present with the person in front of you. When you listen without planning your response, the other person feels it. When you move through your day without the frenzy of divided attention, something in you becomes available. Available for kindness, available for patience, available for the small gestures that hold a life together. This is where the practice meets the world. Not in grand gestures, but in the quality of your attention. In the way you set down your phone when your child speaks. In the way you finish one email before starting the next. In the way you wash a dish as though washing a dish matters. Because it does. Not because dishes are sacred, but because presence is, and presence can live anywhere. So as you move forward from here, carry this lightly. Do not turn it into one more thing to perfect. Do not measure yourself against an ideal of constant focus. Simply notice. Notice when you are here and when you are not. Notice what it feels like to return. Notice the breath that is always waiting, patient as the earth beneath your feet. May this practice serve you. May it bring you moments of quiet in the midst of noise. May it remind you that you are enough, exactly as you are, without needing to do more or be more or hold more than this one moment. And may it extend outward. May your presence become a gift to those around you. May your steadiness offer them permission to slow down. May the care you bring to one thing at a time ripple out in ways you cannot see or measure. May all beings find ease. May all beings know the relief of returning to what is here. May all beings be free from the suffering of endless distraction. May all beings rest in the simplicity of this breath, this step, this moment. If you would like to continue, there are other reflections waiting. No urgency. They will be here when you are ready. For now, let this settle. Let the words fade and the silence return. You have done enough. You are enough. Rest here as long as you need.